You mentioned El Salvador. What are your thoughts on how El Salvador has kind of cleaned up their country?
My thoughts are not going to be particularly original on this one. I think I do not remove anything from the actual results. El Salvador went from one of the deadliest countries in the region, if not in the world, to one of the safest. Violent crime is down across the board. That's incredible. The thing is, it's led to two problems. One is internal, one is external. One is this internal perception of Bukele. Bukele is a dictator. I mean, yes, he won a fair election. I'm not denying that, but he has used this push to jail political opponents. Anyone who opposes him is threatened. Oh, well, we'll just say you're a gang member and you'll go into SECOP because, I mean, no one gets due process, right? You're getting dozens of people tried at a time. There's no due process. There's no follow-up. There's no what happens next. You could keep these people in that jail forever, but I guess that's impractical at a certain point. So, what's the breaking point there? What's the end game 5-10 years down the line when you continue jailing people? You also haven't addressed the socioeconomic conditions that led to the gangs being a problem in the first place, right? You can't just systematically keep putting people in jail, but at some point that's going to lead to diminishing returns. And the trade-off for that is you have a dictator, you have police who have basically taken over extortion, corruption, and racketeering in the country. Yes, they're not killing people, which is, I'm not denying it, a huge plus. But it leads to this myth that that's the only way to go. And I've beaten my head against the screen talking to people in Ecuador, Argentina, even Chile, who are like, oh, well, we need to do the same thing. I'm like, you can't. You cannot do it. El Salvador is an incredibly dense, very populated country with gangs that were highly identifiable and with a level of violence that inured the population to the risks of this strategy. You cannot replicate it anywhere else. Like, I don't see a single country, maybe a Guatemala or a Honduras, that could go down that same route as El Salvador with the same level of success. It's not possible. I hate that mano dura, which is Bukele's policy, has dominated the conversation so much because it diminishes the chance for other types of policymaking to get a look at.
Well, I thought it was interesting that the U.S. government, was entertaining that thought. I'm curious how you think about that real quick, because I want to get it after that. We're going to get into TDA, but I'm curious to know how you felt about, us putting these criminals who've been apprehended here in the United States and potentially sending them out there.
I mean, I want to push back on the notion that these people were all criminals. We have no idea. And again, I'm not completely alienated to this process of you enter the country illegally, you don't get the same due process as others. You get deported, you don't necessarily get a court case. Okay, that's legally dubious, but I can understand the rhetoric behind it. The thing is that these people didn't get due process, but they were not just deported back to their home countries. They were labeled as Tren de Aragua MS-13 terrorists with very little evidence, and then carted off to a maximum security prison in which they have essentially disappeared. It's a gulag. And again, I'm not asking your audience, I'm not asking Americans to be necessarily sympathetic with those people. It just, like in El Salvador, creates a worrying precedent, because who's next to be labeled a criminal and shipped off to some dark corner of the world that we don't hear about you anymore? I know it feels, liberal, wishy-washy for me to say it, but we know for a fact some of those people who were sent, those 250 odd, were not Tren de Aragua. Anyone who tells you that Tren de Aragua can be identified by a tattoo is wrong or lying. There is no Tren de Aragua tattoo. It's not MS-13 who tattooed it on their knuckles or their chests. Tren de Aragua, and I've been studying the buggers for 7 years, don't have identifying markers on their skin. You can identify them in other ways, social media, the criminal economies that they do. And that's one of the chapters of the book. One of the chapters of the book is, are Tren de Aragua terrorists? I would say yes, they are, in the threat that they pose. But you can't label them, you can't identify them in the way that we have been.
What is the title of the book that's coming out?
Tren de Aragua, the guide to America's growing criminal threat.
So let's talk about it. So I haven't heard almost nothing about TDA in the past probably 2 months now, because the conversation's been taken over. The MS-13 guy that was deported, and as well as, all the conversation about El Salvador and all the other little conversations, but TDA has almost been non-existent on my radar right now. Why is that?
The thing is, I don't think it's certainly less than it was when they carted off the 250, but if you do a news alert on TDA, it'll pop up almost every day. They arrested, I think, last week in Colorado. They busted Colorado Springs. They busted this illegal nightclub with about 100 people there, and they said it was Tren de Aragua. They said it was MS-13.